Right. Welcome, everybody, to the Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026 meeting of the Single Exit Multiplex Housing Tag. Nice to have the band back together again. Have two items that have come up that we've been asked to address. So we will begin with attendance.
All right, we're looking a little light as it stands, but Roger Haringa,
I am here.
Dan Young is not online with us at the moment. John Hall,
Here.
thank you. Joe Mayo, not seeing online. Andy Lorenz,
I'm present, sir.
thank you. David Kinley, not seeing online. Jeremy Moore,
I'm here.
thank you. Jonathan Goldsmith, not seeing online. Robert Baglio, not seeing online. Michael Wright, not online. Jesse Bank, not online. Shweta Sinha, not seeing online. Mike Messer, he let us know that he's got some training going on today, and he's hoping maybe David would be online for him, but I don't see David online either. But David Lynham, Rich Geisky, not seeing online. Spencer Gardner, I'm not seeing online. Derek Hugel, not online. Richard Williams,
I'm here.
thank you. John Sue, I think John's planning on being here, but a little bit late. Was not here at the moment. So with that, we are shy of a quorum by 3 seats.
Okay. Let's go ahead and have anybody from the public that would like to be recognized.
This is Hoyt Jeter from the city of Tacoma.
Thanks, White. Patrick, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. This is Patrick Hanks with the Building Industry Association of Washington.
Okay, and Elizabeth.
And Elizabeth Torsky with Cascade Natural Gas. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any other hands. Well, let us, I know there was discussion at one point about, I think that was on a different tag that they were struggling to get a quorum, but I think we have been pretty good at it so far. I think we should go ahead and have a conversation, start the discussion topics, and we will hesitate or wait till we have um, more members and have a quorum before we do the official approve the agenda and go through the items. I see that Shweta just logged on.
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you.
Dan Young is on with us as well.
So we are one short.
No, Dan's the alternate chair, so we're still
Okay.
2 seats short.
I don't count, Roger.
Okay. So we're two seats short, Dustin?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Let's see. And is Micah on? Micah is not on.
I saw Micah Chappelle on, and I tried to give him a button to press to talk, and it's giving me an error message. Micah, can we hear you?
I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I hear you. So,
Okay. I'm here.
Cool.
So Micah, you were the one that raised the question about the multiplex housing, which is agenda item number 3. And again, I recognize we don't have a quorum, but once we get a quorum, we can go back and revisit, summarize, and Spencer.
Sorry, I missed the roll call, but I'm here. So if that helps with quorum, just wanted to make sure you knew.
Dustin?
It does help, but it doesn't get us across the line.
We're one short now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So Micah, if you could, and I did a little bit of investigating myself here, if you could raise the question or concern or pose the question for us, I think that would be beneficial.
All right. Thanks, everyone. and I know some history's been dug up on this too from Rich Williams if he's on, but there was a training that we put on in SDCI last week, and an individual asked a question about adult family homes and multiplex, and then of course it was also a discussion around duplexes and where these are allowed and if they are going to be allowed in this multiplex housing appendix. And then it led into the additional discussion of family home child care as well. We do have sections on that, and would these be allowed in these multiplex structures? When we look at the appendix that you all have approved already, we know this is approved, but it's just a discussion, maybe even interpretation questions. It starts out with the scoping of the IRC. It says shall be built to this code, and then exception number 7 says multiplex buildings shall be permitted to be construction in accordance with the IRC as modified by the appendix. So how I would interpret that, or maybe others would say that, okay, since it is built in accordance with the IRC and modified by the appendix, that you would, unless it's explicitly stated otherwise, be allowed to have adult family homes in this structure type, and even family home childcare in this structure type. I know that somebody had mentioned that, hey, it does say that these are residential use, but again, we are also scoped to the IRC, which as long as it's a dwelling, it can be used for both of those types of uses, the adult family home and the family home childcare. So that's kind of where the question came up, and I guess we would have it up to the tag. I know that Jeremy did mention it, but others have kind of talked about this. Again, Rich brought this up where it was talked about in a couple of meetings, said no, the indication is we're not going to allow those. But if we look at the multiplex, it does not state that they shall be only for residential use and no other uses, including these 2 items. That's kind of the discussion. We can open it up, and I know others have a different interpretation maybe of what's approved in the appendix, but that's where the came from.
Okay, Jeremy's hand was up first.
Yeah, thank you, Micah. Thank you, Roger. Yeah, it's a good discussion to have. My recollection of how we got here was the intent was to clearly limit it to residential apartment use only as it's worded, meaning to be used as a dwelling unit. With these multiplexes, when we started off, we discussed mitigating factors, and one of the first ones we discussed was, well, are we going to have adult family homes in this? Are we going to have daycares in this? Are we going to have these quote unquote slightly higher risk occupancies as IRC occupancies? And I thought that was the intent of number 1, was to limit it to just apartment use as a residential unit. But if we need to clarify it, or if the tag thinks I'm recalling wrong and we don't want to clarify it, I'm just curious what everyone else remembers.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Thanks. Yeah, to follow up on what Jeremy just said, there was a lot of discussion about, how we're gonna make clear that we don't intend to allow adult family homes. And I think we kind of landed on the use of that term, a residential apartment, in XX 101.1 item 1. There was some indecision, however, about whether the reliance on that term was clear enough. I think we kicked around the idea of maybe coming up with a definition for apartment. In my opinion, I don't know. I mean, that is the discussion, whether or not we need to get more specific. I looked at the definitions for adult family home and for dwelling. If you rely on those definitions, the adult family home definition starts by saying that it applies to dwellings, which is also a defined term. And a dwelling is defined as any building that contains 1 or 2 dwelling units used, intended, or designed to be built, used, rented, leased, let or hired out to be occupied, or that are occupied for living purposes. So if people were to go to the definitions, I think you could reasonably arrive at the fact that adult family homes would not be permitted in these buildings. But again, the question in front of everybody is whether that's enough or whether we need to get more specific.
Okay, thanks, Richard. I will just put my thoughts, which are when Micah posed the question, I do remember that we had a pretty robust conversation about varying uses. My recollection, without going back and reviewing recordings and all that kind of fun stuff, was that we had wanted to limit it to apartment use only. And my interpretation of that was that that did not include adult family homes. However, being, my response to Micah was, does the document that we have, is it clear enough that that limited to residential apartment use only is clear enough that that is not meant to be adult family homes? And I don't know that I have that. Not the arbiter of that, whether that's sufficient or not. Other comments? I see hands up. I am not sure who, Ardell, you're on top of my list, so why don't you go first?
Thanks. Hi. I don't know if I appreciate the history. I wasn't part of those meetings. So, uh, it takes a few definitions to get to, yeah, that doesn't apply because residential apartment's not defined in this code, right? So you could do it with like leave the language as it is. With this conversation, and that explanation, it's clear to me, but only after this conversation and explanation. So if an information box is something that's available to clarify, that's an option too.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, you're next on my list. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious from previous experience with situations like this, how good is the communication between like Department of Labor in Washington? Like if someone's applying for a license for an adult family home, is there someone who's checking the facility? Either they're building a new building and they're going to insert their facility into this new building that's being designed, which I think is rarely the case. I think more often than not, they're already looking at an existing building and going to convert something that's residential into what's now going to be their space. And if that's the case, I don't know that the building code is going to be able to prevent what you guys are discussing. Just a thought. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but I think the rules are going to have to be more dictated on the license of the adult family home as opposed to the building code.
Very good question. Um, I'm wanting to list these people as Dustin, can you go to pull up the 2021 Washington State Residential Code? And I forget, I'm trying to find out what the section is. I had it and now I've lost it. On adult family homes, so we can look at what the code currently says. And I think that Hoyt, you're next. Let's go ahead and
Yeah, I'll go
continue.
ahead while he's looking that up.
Yeah.
I think it specifically should be stated in this appendix. The nice thing about an appendix is it is something that's adopted off and on, and the state may adopt it. I think it should be clear. I don't personally. I think that was a great point that Micah brought up on that. I don't think it is clear, and I think people will start using it. There's different levels of experience that are using the code, especially new users that maybe get into the code to start using it. And I think it should be specifically specifically stated that that's not allowed. So,
Okay. I have some questions about the particular section, but let's go ahead. Micah, you are up, and then Ardell.
Thanks. I guess a few more parts of that are going to be the RCW or the RCW for adult family homes. and then some of the WAC rules we have for Group R. Of course, in our multiplex adoption here, I want to say you all are indicating that these are not an R2, but right now an adult family home is allowed in an R2 as long as it's not more than 2 dwelling units. I think I see how Rich is getting there, but again, it's kind of a roundabout and may not be as clear, although the scoping section of your appendix, or yes, of the appendix does have item number 1, says limited to residential apartment use only. But anyway, I'll let Ardell talk. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
lots of stuff.
Okay, go ahead, Ardell. And then we'll
Uh,
get Jeremy and Richard.
I wanted to go back and answer. There was a question, a comment about, does licensing regulate this? By putting it in the building code, we won't actually catch it, right? And so that's a fair comment. Adult family homes, they do have to get a WABO checklist completed by the building department. So those are, our staff, we have an ask out to both, uh, was it Al over at, sorry, I'm looking at Micah. Um, Al Spalding around Adult
Yes.
Family Homes, and also Tracy Schreiber over at DCYF for the childcare. But Adult Family Homes, they do have to get the checklist completed, so the building department does get to see those, and they are supposed to get a permit or the checklist completed. So there is some sort of checks and measures there. We were also told that those are typically limited to 1 and 2 family homes. And maybe that's already in their legislation. We couldn't find it. On the family home childcare, though, those do not always come to the building department. Uh, Often they're small, and so they're just opening, and licensing is saying, hey, you need to go get a building permit, but they don't necessarily hold their license for confirmation of a permit. Only on the 13 plus capacity waiver have we, and that's a recent change in the last code cycle, do we have the checklist where the building department does have to sign off. And so, again, if it's what is the intent of this tag in these provisions, if it's to exclude family home childcare and adult family homes, I think adding an informational note or making it clear is going to be just sort of a backstop to make sure we don't get them in multiplex.
Okay. Thank you. Jeremy?
Yes, thank you. So we all thought it was clear, but the sheer fact that we're having this discussion means it's probably not clear enough. And I agree with Hoyt when he said some jurisdictional knowledge or history isn't as robust as others, and people could interpret this in a different manner. And so I think for consistency, maybe it's as clear as adding another sentence after that charging statement where we scope that it's for apartment use only. Maybe it's as simple as recommending adding a sentence there that says something along the lines of these buildings are not intended for or allowed to be used for adult family homes, childcare facilities, or live work units. Because that was part of our discussion all along was that. I think our first statement was trying to make it exclusively for residential use without those, but maybe we need to just add something in there to clarify. That's my
Hey, Dustin, if we're going to get started talking about adding a sentence, which I'm kind of thinking that might be where we're heading, you might want to pull that back up. Approve? Yes, thank you. Richard, go ahead.
We also have a quorum here today. David Lynham is with us.
All right.
Yeah, I just wanted to restate that while I think you can get there with definitions, I do think it's probably more reasonable to make it clearer so everybody understands it and there's no confusion, because us relying upon that, the reference to apartments, we know what the intent is, but I do think it probably would stand to be a little clearer. Maybe what we do is and I don't know if we want to point to the IBC specifically, but you could do something to the effect of saying that, we're limiting this to apartment houses, all, the list of other uses, other R2 occupancies, does not apply. We're just limiting it to apartment houses. So I don't have specific language for you, but maybe we can come up with something now or at some point.
Okay, Micah?
Thanks, all. I think that'd be helpful. I think part of what kind of led to some of this as well is the sentence, if you scroll down just a little bit, Dustin, where it talks about the multiplex building not complying with the above conditions shall be designed in accordance with the IBC, and then it goes into the IFC for R2. So it's maybe that's a nuance that needs to be cleaned up. Is in the building code, is it going to be designed as an R2 or some other occupancy group? And is that consistent with the requirements of the R2 for the fire code? And then I do want to, I mean, I think we'll be there.
Okay. I think Richard, your hand is up next on my list.
Oh, yeah, I'll lower it. Like, I did have one more thing to add we've been talking about adult family homes, and I think our adult brought this up too, about some other things that might be looked at from other agencies. But, I gave you an example of the definitions, in my opinion, eliminating adult family homes, but there's a whole bunch of other items that we just need to make sure everybody's clear about us wanting to also eliminate from consideration in these buildings. So yeah, I think adding something would definitely be helpful.
Okay. Jeremy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just trying to rehash this. I don't know if we're getting confused or not. We started talking about R2s, and I know that the single exit part of this was all about calling it an R2, so on and so forth. If my understanding is correct and my memory recalls correct, is this multiplex was intended to be an R2, or sorry, here I go, was intended to be a residential use built out of the IRC, and we didn't want any reference to R2 to get confused. So that we stayed away from referencing IBC, we stayed away from calling it an R2 at all. And then we had the fire code challenge, and we was like, how do we get the fire marshal's office involved, basically, because it's an IRC building now. And that's how we got to the only reference to this fire code as an R2, because that kicks them on how to regulate the sprinkler systems and alarms and everything per their fire code requirement. And it was supposed to be a simple, clarifying statement to direct them for the sprinkler suppression and alarm requirements. So they're going to be monitored and sprinklered like an R2 in the fire code, but all along we tried to avoid IBC, R2, all that stuff in this multiplex because the intent of the legislation was to stay in the IRC. So I think a clarifying statement. When we said residential apartment use only, that was intended to clarify, and it's obviously not. But we basically wanted people eating, sleeping, and living there, not having businesses, not having daycares, adult family homes. So however is best to add a sentence or something to clarify what's excluded might be simplest.
Okay. I'll take one more comment from David, and then I'm going to back up and do the official approving the agenda since we now have a quorum. So David, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I agree with Jeremy. I'm trying to remember back, just scattering everywhere for notes. We've been at this so long, but as I recall, that's how we resolved needing sprinklers and fire alarms and so forth in it. So I can support you what you're saying there, Jeremy.
Okay. So now that we have a quorum, we've started, I think we're quite a ways, had a good, robust discussion about agenda item number 3. But if we can go back, I guess agenda item 1, we've had the welcome and introduction. Agenda item 2 is review and approve the agenda. So could I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda? And then we can have discussion about it.
So moved.
Thanks, Andy.
Second, this is Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy. Are there any discussion items? All right, all those in favor of approving the agenda say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. So now we are officially into the multiplex housing discussion, agenda item number 3. What I'm going to summarize for folks, uh, what I hear people saying is there's two things that we need to kind of consider here. Number one is um, what are we going to do? And I think that we are arriving at let's make some editorial clarifications, probably on now I lost it, item 101.1, item 1. The other point that we do need to consider is because this has been approved by the council to move into CR 102, do we think that this is an editorial change? An editorial change can be picked up by staff, whereas if it is a change in what's the right term? An actual change in
Regulatory
the
effect.
technical. What's that?
The regulatory effect.
Yes. Is the regulatory effect different, or is this a clarification? My personal opinion is this is an editorial change that we all thought that this was meant to be residential apartment use only, and we've been, folks have raised the question that it maybe is not clear, and we are just clarifying that question. So as we go through this, those are the two things I guess I would ask for somebody to start proposing some modifications to item 1, and then we also need to consider whether this is an editorial change or not. So Hoyt, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize, I think it's editorial change. I don't think you have to go through a whole bunch of um, things on that. I think it's just editorial to make it clear. So
Okay, I agree with that. Thank you. Ardell?
I think Jeremy's proposal that he said earlier, the building shall not contain adult family home, childcare, or live work, is adequate to clarify the tag's intent. You could add that to item 1, or you can make it a separate item, number 2, and renumber. But I like Jeremy's language from previously.
My question about that is, do those three things, so we've raised the question about adult family homes. Are those three things that are mentioned, are those the only things that people could, again, I'm not very adept at the IRC. Is that enough to exclude everything?
I think the question will be lodging houses, and do we even want to tackle that? That's the only other.
I agree with Ardell. We would just want to add lodging house to it real quick. I
Okay.
think that is the only defined term in the IRC that's other than a dwelling unit, I believe.
Okay.
I'll just jump on and throw out there, do we want to prohibit any type of R4 that can be built as an R3, which is an adult family home? I know that's getting way into the weeds, but if you remember, we did bring back R4 this last cycle for Washington.
But R4, is that not in the IBC, Micah?
But again, the sentence after this section you're looking at modifying states that if it's not built to this, it can be built to the IBC. And it's those conditions above.
And the intent of that is that if you don't do it per this appendix, then you're going to the building code and you're going to build an R2 apartment complex under the IBC, and you get all the fun and games of that. So
yeah, well, even though that I see it a little different. It only says that you have to comply with the above conditions. You don't have to comply with the rest of the appendix to build this multiplex. So if you don't comply with these items, then you got to go to one of the others. But again, just throwing it out there. R4, if you guys are okay with not including anything from R4, that's fine. But those are
I don't.
covered. So
go ahead, Ardell.
The IRC is not currently scoped. I don't think I can see how Micah's getting there, but I don't think that everything that this reference to the IBC needs to then be sort of excluded out of the charging language in item 1. I'm okay treating item 1 as, or clarifying item 1 for the additional uses that are within the residential code that we want to exclude from being in a multiplex.
Okay. And you're okay with the sentence at the bottom about, I know it is the intent that if you're not doing this, then you have to go build it out of the IBC. I guess I'm asking Ardell, are you okay with that sentence at the bottom where a multiplex building not complying with all of the above conditions? Or
Yes.
all of the above conditions? Is there a modification to that that says this whole section? I don't know.
I I think that's the language we haven't tried this language in effect. I have a lot easier time kicking somebody into the IBC based on that statement than I do with something that's already in the residential code, which is family home childcare and adult family
Yeah.
homes and live work and lodging. What are they called? Lodging houses. Though that's not as clear right now.
Okay. Jeremy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the scoping here, it was referenced before in a charging statement that said, multiplexes, are going to be built according to this appendix. It was our previous charging statement. I think John Sue doctored that up real good. And then it gets us to this scoping. And so I think that sentence down below can stand on its own.
Okay.
The intent of that is, if we're not going to build a multiplex in accordance with this appendix, we're going to the IBC for an apartment. I
Okay.
thought that was the discussion and the intent, and then the clarifying statement to exclude those other uses in number one, or creating another number as Ardell suggested. I think that would be a good clarifying editorial item.
Okay, I'm gonna just to my preference, and I don't know why that I have this preference, is to just add a sentence to item one before the exception. So, Dustin, can you maybe who was it, Jeremy or Ardell, that had that? How does the sentence begin?
Well, what I had before was these buildings are not
Nor allowed.
intended or allowed to be used for adult family homes, child care facilities, live work units, or lodging houses.
And I think I just simplified it a little bit, Jeremy, to just say the building shall not contain.
I like that better. Crystal clear for building officials. I like shall. I like
Yeah.
shall.
Yeah,
Can
I
we
was,
use Ardell's editorial on that?
Friendly amendment, Jeremy.
I like
yeah,
it. I like
yeah.
it.
I was just gonna say the same thing. Ardell, I like that the shall in there. It's one of,
I
so
do. Let's write it like code and not an opinion piece. I like it.
And is it lodging houses by itself, or is that the whole term?
Um,
I would say yes.
Lodging house.
I guess should all those be capitalized? I get in a habit of capitalizing everything.
They are defined, so are they supposed to be italic? But I don't know about the capitalization.
yeah, I was gonna say they should be italicized, and I don't know about the capitalization either. So.
Spencer, do you have a comment?
Question about live work units. I'm not familiar with the definition in the building code. I assume that's not preventing somebody from working out of a bedroom remotely or something like that, but what is specific about live work units?
Can you go to the definition?
Yeah, just to let you know, that's been discussed at a um in all codes throughout the nation too about the same thing. It's basically made just to let you know as a general stuff. It's supposed to be pretty much set for you're pretty much living in it, but you're also able to work in it and have spaces in your area that is workability because it's different people around the country were interpreting different because there's sometimes work live units or is it live work units? I just hopefully that clarifies it, but this has been to talk. This is pretty clear what they want. It's basically for residential use, but they have spaces in there that they could work in.
Significant portion of the space includes a non-residential use that is operated by the tenant.
Yeah, I
Is
think
that,
I don't have any problems. I just wanted to make sure I understood.
yeah. Okay. Um, I don't see any other hands up. I guess I would ask for a motion and to approve the edit to item one. Actually, I would like it worded as the editorial change to item number one. If I could get a motion and a second for that, and then we can have a further discussion.
Motion to approve, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
I'll second.
Oh, sorry.
Spencer.
Thanks, Spencer. Dustin, do you have the motion?
Yes.
Okay. Any other discussion? All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. So that is item number three.
I do
Agenda.
have one other thing I'd like to address in item number three. So at the council, they made the motion for staff to make a change to the EV charging portion of this. This document here posted today does have that. So 105.3 was where the change was made. And I've got it shown here in the Word document posted in track changes. The PDF doesn't show the change like we have here. But this is what I took away from the council meeting, and I just wanted to run that by the group since we're talking about this appendix.
It basically was to get rid of the table because we
Yes.
got to the point where the table really wasn't needed and make sure that the language was added into the. I am just going to ask because that was done at the council level. I reviewing it is fine. If people have concerns about it, let's go ahead and talk about it. I have a couple hands up. Ardell, go ahead.
Just a point of clarification, you had italicized, sorry, this is on the prior section.
Yeah.
Family home childcare shows as italicized throughout the residential code, but I can't find it in a definition list. So if we don't have a definition, maybe it's just me. Uh, if if you could just clarify it as family home childcare per section R331. That's just I think it's still meeting the same intent, but I honestly can't find that definition. Thanks.
Yeah, I couldn't find the definition either. I looked, and it is italicized in the body of the code.
331, I think. 331, yeah.
I don't know what it is in the 24, but whatever it is in the 24 code.
Oh.
Thanks.
I will double check that as we get it
Yeah.
drafted.
Good catch.
Thanks, Dustin.
I had another hand. Micah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll throw out. I think that definition is in the state building code. It's child care family home in the building code WAC 51510202, but it is not in the residential WAC. So that was a very nice catch. I don't know if that's necessary editorial, but
So
There we
we
go.
we have it in 51510202, and I believe we've got some expedited rulemaking making its final runs to get the correlations done in IBC and IFC. So this definition should be global in
Could be there.
2021.
Okay. Sorry, that was my error then. I didn't look up childcare, comma, family home.
The child care family home is in my old school slip-in sheets for the 2021 code. The last ones, I'm going to save them. Maybe they'll be in a museum someday.
Thank you. Sorry,
Yeah.
back to EV. Appreciate it.
I don't print the insert pages for Seattle, Jeremy. I make them all digital. I just wanted to jump in on the EV and say thanks for this. I think this was another topic that I brought up at the council, so I appreciate that change. And if it needs support from the tag, that'd be great. If it doesn't, but
I
this was.
just wanted to make
appreciate
sure I
it.
didn't miss the mark.
I think you're spot on, Dustin. So I appreciate it. Thanks,
Thank you.
and
And
thanks
I'll make-
everyone for the clarifying language prohibiting those other uses.
Yep. I think it's a good clarification. And if there are anybody that after this has a question or concern about this language, it certainly, again, this is going into CR 102. So if there is a editorial comment that you have, we can also always bring that up during public comment. So Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say I support the EV charging change. Thanks to Dustin for doing that.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Are we ready to move on to agenda item number 4? Single exit work.
Before we do, we have John Sue joining us now, and John, you should get a permission to join as a panelist. But yes.
Okay.
Can I just say one thing? This is just Hoyt.
Yep.
Dealing with residentials and clarity. I agree the words say the same thing, but I tell you that I don't want to be negative to people or try to insult anybody, but I find that the charts actually it's easier to explain to people that are non used to the code compared to all the words. The words kind of just they gleam over it. I don't feel I will have any problems going off the words and knowing it. I think other people probably on this call will have the same thing. But in my experience with the IRC, I'm mostly in the IBC, but in the IRC, it seems like tables work. It really stands out to other people. And I apologize for the phone call. I just turned that off. I just wanted to put that out. If the chart says the same thing, I don't see any reason why you can't just leave it in, but that's just me. So.
Okay. Noted. Okay, single exit work. So where we're at on the single exit. This was not approved by the council, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dustin, but specifically the language was approved. However, the idea or the question or the proposal to potentially add in allow type 3A construction to be increased to 6 stories. We had that discussion at the council. The council did not make a determination, but felt like it was a big enough technical question that it should come back to the tag, and the tag should have the conversation and come up with a recommendation. So that is our task today. I am just going to recap. Well, go ahead. Okay. I'm going to recap my understanding. I know that very early on we did have this discussion about different building types. I think even the type 3A and 6 stories may have been part of that conversation. And at the time, this was early on in our conversation about single exits. We all kind of felt like, that's beyond the scope of what we're asked to do. So let's just, to keep it simple, let's stay with where we're at. And not address or not basically not address the type 3A going to 6 stories. After the fact, Todd Bayreuther came up with basically a suggestion that we reconsider that. And in my investigation of the type 3A construction going to 6 stories, there are certain limits that are put on it. Early morning, and I'm getting these items from a presentation that Ardell put on. I got that off of the internet, so I was trying to educate myself. Early warning, suppression, containment, structural protection, and egress. As I look at those things and tried to educate myself, we basically, in the single exit, we have adopted all of those principles that are adopted in the Seattle Building Code that allows the 6-story of type 3A. So I felt like it was a really good, there can be, in my opinion, there can be a pretty good argument made that, the type 3A that goes to 6 stories with the limits of, 6,000 square feet and the 2 hour and everything like that. Um, I think that there's a pretty good argument that we could allow it. I understand that there are people that feel like it is a separate item of discussion, something above and beyond that we maybe shouldn't do it. But I think that those are both very good arguments, and I think that we should allow folks to consider it. And so, what I would propose to do is, Todd, you are on, right?
He's a
I
good
see your
Yes, I
name.
am.
I would like Todd to go through and suggest why he believes that we could or should make this change. And there is the proposed changes was posted, and it's basically adding number 21 to the single exit. And then after that, I don't know if it's Ardell or Micah or John who wants to maybe talk about why they're presenting an argument as to why we don't think we should do it, and then we will go into the discussion. So, Todd, you're up first, and then between John and Ardell and Micah, you guys tell me who you would like to kind of do the presentation.
Okay.
So, go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And this is meant to be first of all, a very respectful challenge to, from question, I should say, to ask about intent. I think it's completely fair that the tag established at some point, their interpretation of the legislative intent. And I think it's important that the process played out and first address, egress and other considerations to replace the second stair. Now that that's happened and certain systems has been chosen, then I think it's a important question to circle back and say, well, if certain things are true, such as the 13 system, I think there's good justification for that. And it was very clearly stated that is, I call it the backbone of a lot of other decision making. So this is multivariable calculus, and you can't just, randomly change one variable, of course. But as we start to lock in those certain things that make a lot of sense in this bundle, I do know from the sponsor standpoint, and I just confirmed, a couple hours ago in Olympia that her intent is to push towards one construction type. Now, in the end, her vote is one of all, House representatives and senators, that passed this bill. So there is no legislative intent, specifically written into that bill. But I think it's there's understanding that this is meant to, find the most cost-effective solution that meets all the performance requirements. Okay, so in that, I would interpret what the council has asked here is to say, the council has referred this back down to ask that question because I believe there probably is a legislative intent or there's justified to look at it. Okay, so in this, I have as many questions as in actually just proposing. Of course, you'll recognize that it is very much, aligned with the Seattle provisions. I'm very aware from my many conversations with many of you that these were intended for a little different scenario. They're intended for Seattle specific considerations of operations. But my questions here, and I even debated, being very agnostic to material types, why not 2A, why not 4HT? And I think I better understand now, but I'd love to hear from others on why 3A really is the one thing to zero in on in this consideration. I appreciate that the 20 units, compartment, per the overall single stair, and 5 stories. I understand how the tag got to that. But what it drives to is that it would lead to a 5-story 20-unit building. But as soon as you want to get that extra story, it's driving into either 4 HT, A, B, C, which is driving to 2-hour fire ratings, or it's driving to, all 1A, which is probably not cost effective in many cases. Of course, there are provisions for 2A to go above 5 stories, but then there's going to be separation on the external that maybe doesn't, really allow that for infill. So I guess kind of getting right to it here, my questions on this are, if we were to go consider this, where does 6,000 come from? I don't understand that math. I'm not challenging. I just would love to hear from experts on where the cap comes from, and is that necessary if you've already established the 20 feet and the 125 feet? Would that not limit the floor plate to an acceptable level? Four is just kind of practical in the algebra here. If you're going to do 20 units and allow 5 stories for that single exit, it's just practically going to be 4 more units on that ground floor. So it kind of drives it anyway to an average of 4. So the question in 3 would be, should it be specifically held to 4? Because that's part of the math of 20 feet, 125 feet, and 4, even though that's not how the rest of the section is addressed. And then, of course, the unprotected vertical openings. I think that's kind of obvious, but making sure that it doesn't penetrate the floor assemblies here. And then my final question here is, and then this has the horizontal assembly, but please debate that of the 2-hour fire separation, including the provision for, that could be mass timber fire rated. And then my question becomes about horizontal cavities. Should that be a consideration? And I would just love to be educated on it. So I'm going to stop there and appreciate everyone's feedback.
Okay. Ardell, your hand is up.
I will, I can go first, and John, feel free to jump in. I did share the a background document on development of the 5.10.10 provisions that Dustin has uploaded. It's the main takeaway is that we were directed by our council to develop like we had been upzoned in a lot of portions of the city to 85 feet. We got feedback from developers saying we can do a 5A over a 1A, and get to 70 feet. We can do a 3A to 85 feet, but what we really need is to get 6 stories out of it. And so we were directed by council to evaluate code changes to get 6 stories of 3A. So that, that's how we got here, but we had a group of developers, engineers, architects, fire and code officials, both from Seattle and also from neighboring jurisdictions, Bellevue, Shoreline. I forget who else joined, but it was a multi-day charrette where we tried to come up with a package to allow us to get to 6 stories. And it's where do you get justification for going taller with wood frame construction, knowing that you're adding fire load? And the answer started with 510.5, which we already have in the Washington State Code. So that gives you that allowable height increase by 10 feet and allowable stories by 1, where you're providing additional compartmentation and an increased fire rated separation 2 stories below grade. 510.5 has a 3,000 square foot compartment divided by firewalls and a 3-hour rating to the basement level. So Todd, I'll defer to John on the 6,000, but I think that we started with what are our typical lots and increase the compartmentation. So it's at over 6,000, you have to create more compartments. Under 6,000 can be a single compartment. And I honestly think it was just double 3,000, and we were trying to get to like a 36,000 square foot floor plate. So we started with 510.5. We wanted to get up to 6 stories, and we wanted to allow large floor plates. What you've got in 510.10, I've also included in this document. And then a question came to me from, I think from Angela, how on the, does Seattle allow single exit provisions to be used in a 510.10 building? And technically you can. And after some evaluation of our permitting yesterday afternoon, I did find that we do have one single exit Seattle special that is a 51010 building. And so there's no prohibition. You have to comply with all the single exit requirements and all the 51010 provisions. Again, I want to emphasize that this was a Seattle specific code change and and created in collaboration with other stakeholders and significantly with significant input from our fire department and their comfort level with the enhancements that we provided, along with a fire marshal at the time, Chief Cordova, who was willing to work with with where the building department provision or building code provisions landed, as long as it didn't change how SFD was fighting fires. And so I'll leave it at that. I'll see if John has anything to add. But again, I want to emphasize we still have 510.5 available. So even without adding this section, you could go to 6 stories of type 3A construction and allow a single exit with 3,000 square foot compartments. I see you scrolling around, just walking through 51010. We do have, we relocate 510.5 to 510.9 just because it's convenient to see them together. But 51010 has a 2-hour fire resistance rating on the first floor, the first story of type 3A construction. So if I had a 6-story type 3A building, the first elevated story would be a 2-hour horizontal assembly. The floors above that would be 1 hour as per typical 3A construction. And if you had floors below grade, there's no specific provisions for that. In the 510.5 provisions, how it differs is that 3-hour assembly is at grade. It's separating the basement stories. So just wanted to highlight that. Some differences with what Todd's proposed versus the 51010 provisions would be the mezzanines shall not be allowed in any story of the type 3A construction. So item number 5. And Todd, I don't know what your thought process was in dropping that out. I would, if the tag does want to consider moving this in, I would recommend adding that in. Mezzanines were prohibited to, again, not get just a 6-story building, but also to not have these mezzanine levels that are, again, adding additional, even more fire load at those levels. And then the other one that's not explicit is in what you've proposed, Todd, is that each compartment shall have an enclosed exit stairway and a standpipe. That's been dropped out, but I think you'd already get that. So each compartment shall have a stairway in the single exit. So you've only got one compartment, you've got one stair. And the standpipe is triggered, I believe, over 4 stories. I'll defer to the fire folks on that. So I think you would get that as well. So I'm neutral on leaving that out. Final comment is I think this was developed independently of the single exit provisions. The 51010, as Todd noted earlier, was addressing a need to go taller with wood construction, keep the cost of construction down for putting out or for allowing wood construction to go taller where we were upzoned. It's addressing a slightly different need than the single exit. I think it's odd for me to see it just allowed in a single exit. I think John noted this in some discussion versus just in a two exit building or more. You'd only get this allowance in a single exit building. Like this is a change to construction type. That to me should be in the construction type section or in 5.10.10 and or in the tables and not in the single exit provisions. So that's my reluctance. I think it's outside the scoping of this legislative directive. Thanks.
Okay. Hoyt, I know your hand's up, but I guess I'd like to hear from John kind of to shape the discussion about 5.10.10, and then we'll open it up to more comments.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, Ardell obviously covered the bulk of what we discussed at when this went into the code. The other thing I would point out again is, similar to the discussions we had before, this was predicated on, Seattle Fire Department being willing to do this, and Seattle Fire Department being a highly rated fire department. So that was a big deal. Somewhat in answer to Todd's question about where did the 6,000 come from, it was probably, and I don't remember. I mean, it was how many years ago we did this, but it probably was similar to what Ardell said, was getting taking the 3,000 and doubling it just because we didn't want to add too many compartments in these buildings. The developers felt that was not feasible. So the main thing was to try to get at least one firewall in there at some point in these buildings up to what is 12,000 square feet, I think, gross square feet on a floor. So make sure you compartment it at least that much. Let's see, what else? Oh, we wanted at least two compartments in these buildings. Let's see what else. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say was item 6 down at the bottom there was a recognition that, and before I go there, when we talk about wood frame, we're talking about light wood frame, right? We're talking about studs and we're not talking about mass timber. So stud wall construction. And the big push, again, from the city council and as Ardell mentioned, the HALA initiative was to get these into stick frame. So allow the tallest stories of stick frame. They didn't even want to think about going to mass timber at that time. So this is purely about stick frame. The other thing, so going back to item 6 there is a limitation there because there's the structural engineers that I talked to, folks at like the SEAW said, well, you got this taller building, but the weight on the roof, we don't want to have these big heavy roofs up there because that's going to be a seismic issue. So let's find a reasonable number again, to limit the weight on the roof. The other thing that we kind of said when we did training on this with people and discussing it with the committee or the work group that put this together was that I know the structural engineers were really concerned about exterior walls and the shear walls or lack thereof in many of these buildings on the exterior walls. And so we didn't put anything in there directly about that, but we did say, as we talked to developers and architects about this, you may have to put in more shear walls because the engineers are going to say that you got this tall building and we don't have enough shear wall. So you may not be able to have as many windows and doors and things at the exterior as you might expect. That was just a warning. Again, we didn't legislate anything there. but that was a consideration. The other consideration is that there is a height limit in ASCE 7 on wood frame shear walls. And I don't remember the exact number anymore, but we did again insert that into our training.
65 feet, John.
What? Sorry?
65 feet.
65 feet. Yeah. So that does kind of fit. That was one other thing we told people. Look, you have to take that into consideration. Even though you get 85 feet, yes, and 6 stories, you still have to worry about this, that limitation on the shear walls. All this again being about stick frame. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for as far as describing there. I do, as Ardell already pointed out, that I'm really concerned that this really should be a not just for single exits. If you're going to do it for everything, because this makes no sense to allow this in a single exit building, but not in a 2 exit building. I think it belongs in a general chapter, not in an exiting chapter. So I'll conclude with that for now.
Okay. I think Hoyt was up first, and then Jeremy and John.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Hoyt.
Yeah. So one thing pretty much on John, the way I understand it, you start having these drift, this is a prescriptive methods that they're doing, right? Wood, you have a drift limitation. So you're starting to get higher buildings and you start having the drift calculations that, the engineers in the IBC do. They'll end up going there and making sure you have the proper stiffness to do that. And I think because seismic is based on weight, right? It's based on your dead load. You need to limit the area. I mean, you can't just leave it open. So, and what they put on those floors, are they putting in a certain amount of higher dead loads? Let's say they throw gypcrete on there, or they throw something for the sound barriers between stories and stuff. I think it's real important to have the maximum allowable area for each story, and also having the maximum number of dwelling units on each story, because that also, based on the maximum number of dwelling units, when you're egressing at a higher story, the more people you have on the upper levels, the slower going down through the stairways that ends up happening, especially if fire departments are going up during the World Trade Center, what some of the studies have. I think these all should be in there as a prescriptive method. And then if you're not doing a prescriptive method, go into the IBC and do it for the IBC. So I do think these all should still stay allowed on some of the stuff that other people have said also. Hopefully that was clear on that. Thanks.
Well, Hoyt, I want to remind you, this is in the IBC. This is an appendix to the IBC.
The appendix to the IBC. Okay.
Right. And I'm going to put myself in line here too. I do want to address the seismic stuff, being a structural engineer, but Jeremy and John are first. So Jeremy, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I will not be addressing the seismic stuff, Roger. That's not my wheelhouse. I remember talking about this long ago. And I remember what was driving our conversation was, yes, there are provisions in the Seattle Code. However, the legislative intent for this is to be a mandatory statewide appendix. So we started with that discussion. It wasn't going to be just large cities on the I-5 corridor. And then we rolled into table 504.4. And, we're already this legislation already mandated that we take R2 apartments that would normally require 2 exits and remove one. And that we discussed that we shouldn't be amending basically 504.4, table 5044, in addition to removing an exit. In the single exit provision. I just don't think it's part of that scoping for this single exit provision to be modifying table 504.4. So I think what Todd brings up is a great discussion, but in my opinion, it was a discussion for a state amendment for table 504.4, so it can be used throughout all types of buildings, and even when there are 2 or 3 exits or so on and so forth. I just think it's beyond the scoping of the single exit provision. It's my opinion. Thanks.
Okay, John Hall.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't see a reason to add this language in here because we've already said that the building can be built based on, type 1A, 2A, 3A, 5A as elsewhere described in the code. So under 510.5, you can already do a 6-story type 3 building. So if that's the issue, it's already allowed as a 6-story type 3. And so we should be able to do that single exit 6-story type 3 under 510.5 and not need to add something specific into this chapter.
Okay, I just wanted to get some thoughts out there about the seismic, being a structural engineer. The item 6 that's on the screen, limiting the maximum dead load on the roof is a very reasonable restriction to have. I agree putting a big heavy roof up on the top of a building is not good. Todd's proposal did not have that. I know that our proposal already limits, you can't have roof decks except I think private. So if you have a roof deck, it can only be for the unit at the top. So I would, certainly support adding in item number 6 about limiting it to 50 PSF as shown here. I agree that at 6 stories of wood. So first off, John mentioned stick framing. I have always, when I have thought about this, since Todd brought the proposal to my attention, have always assumed that the first floor is stud walls. The critical one is how do you create the 2-hour, I'm going to call it level 2, the first elevated level, that has to be 2-hour. There are ways to do that with TGIs or nominal lumber. I do think a mass timber floor on level 2 would be another option, and it's certainly possible to put a mass timber floor on top of a stud walls. So the second item mentioned is that you will need longer walls, and that is completely true. What we really talk about as structural engineers is the aspect ratio of the wall. So if it is 65 feet tall and you have a 4-foot wall, that's not going to work. You're going to need to have 8-foot walls, 10-foot walls. So there will be a demand for longer walls for sure. The other thing that I actually, as a structural engineer that has not been addressed in the city of Seattle, that I worry more about is shrinkage. When you get shrinkage in a building, the shrinkage occurs in the double top plate and the single bottom plate. The longitudinal shrinkage of the studs is not really that significant, but the shrinkage of the plates is. We often talk about an eighth to maybe even a quarter of an inch of shrinkage per floor. When you get to 6 floors of stud wall framing, that is, an inch and a half of shrinkage. That can be a concern. We have, as in our practice, with the way we've gotten around that even at 5 stories, is to use an engineered lumber top and bottom plate, but that's required to just try to minimize the shrinkage. So those are all considerations from a structural perspective that I just wanted to get out there. I agree that you're going to need to there will be more demand for longer shear walls. I completely agree with that statement. However, that in and of itself wouldn't, in my mind, preclude us from doing this. So with that, I will shut up and go ahead. And we've got some other hands up. I see Todd's hand up first, I think. So Todd, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I might use the chance to kind of redirect a little bit here because I think there's a lot of focus on light frame wood. In my position on the council, I have to represent all materials, and as we go through consideration of whether type 2A, type 5A, which would not be appropriate to go to 6 stories for many reasons, and type 4HT, type 3A is the more agnostic piece. It's more inclusive of other materials. So I think putting any limitations here specific to wood framing would not be appropriate. As a structural designer, yes, it's very hard to design a 6-story building on plates for, crushing and all sorts of things. I wouldn't recommend doing it. But we also have to include, hybrid systems that are including CFS walls. Mass timber walls is actually a recognized system now. It's CLT shear walls. It's very impractical, but it is a thing. Platform framing in the code that is allowed to 65 feet also. And I'd also advise that yes, ASC 7 restricts to 65 feet, but that doesn't prevent me from doing those types of gravity framing and putting a brace framing system or whatever. So we got to be very inclusive of all the systems, all the materials. I think, in this, so even the 6, I guess I maybe disagree a little bit that's a design consideration. That's up to the architect and engineer to demonstrate whether or not, their dead loads and their seismic loads, are appropriate for the system that they're proposing. But coming back to this, I think, yes, I'm very aware of 510.5. I do have questions on how in this that would be interpreted with the firewalls. I think it probably deserves a little discussion what that really looks like if you're gonna, kind of chop this down to, likely 3,000 square foot compartments. How does that work with the single exit? My take on this is that you've come to a consensus and equilibrium on most of the fire and egress issues. To the question of construction type in an appendix and not in the main table, I think it is appropriate because this is a very small floor plate. This is almost a single compartment if you want to consider it like that. We're not going to get up to 12,000 square feet, even without putting a 6,000 square foot limit in there. It's just not really possible with the 20 foot and the 125 feet. So I even challenge whether the 6,000 square feet would need to be in there because this size of building is very small in terms of area. And then it also kind of relates to when we talked about horizontal separation, in previous appendix, amendments. This is not an unlimited square. This is not a downtown Seattle full city block where we're going to have a podium with, 24,000 square feet or, even above 30,000 square feet. To me, this is something that's more appropriate on a 50 by 100-foot lot in downtown Spokane or an extra urban kind of replacement on a flat site for a 24-unit 3-story garden walk-up. This is kind of now where we start to get to a little more density, a little more height that's allowed around centers and corridors or whatever the term would be in Seattle and in Tacoma around transit-oriented development. So I think it is a different animal that doesn't belong in the base code because then you start to have to consider really large floor plates, which this is not. So I just want to put a couple points in there, and I think this is a good discussion. I'd love to hear about firewalls. If one were to design with 510.5 versus something specific here for small floor plates. So thank you.
Roger, you're on mute.
I just said that I don't see anybody's hands up. Spencer, go ahead.
Just a quorum note. I have to jump out for a meeting temporarily, so I didn't want to leave you in trouble with that.
We
That
are
gonna cause any
sitting
problems?
good at the moment.
Okay.
Okay. Richard?
Yeah, I think what I was going to say is I think New York City allows 2,000, a maximum 2,000 or 2,500 square foot per story. I don't know all the details of their provisions, but I think I read that somewhere today. And I only mention that because you probably could come up with what they would consider a viable building just based upon the provisions of 510.5 without adding a firewall. You're limited to 3,000 square feet. So much the same way Todd's trying to not introduce firewalls with the 6,000 square foot limitation, you could, in essence, construct a building without doing anything else. You construct it out of what's provided currently in the code. Again, whether you think that's big enough or not, but it's available, and I without doing anything else. And I had a question for Todd about the four unit limitation. Can you tell me, Todd, what you were getting at with that and why that's different from what we've proposed with not setting a limit for other building types?
Yeah, if I may, Chair. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. Whether or not that's needed or not, it's because I think the provisions that you came up with, it would just naturally, kind of force it to, to 4 per floor over 6 floors, right? 24 unit max, and then five stories with 20 unit limitation on the main compartment to the stair, right? So whether or not it's necessary in there, I think the question would really be to the tag is what combination, if you're to go down this pathway of 20 feet plus the 125 feet plus 4 per floor, like to me, that would limit, you wouldn't even need the 6,000 or any square foot limitation in there because that just already, limits it. Or you could not put that 4 in there and put an area limitation in there. So I would really leave that to the tag expertise. The final note I would make is this is really driven from an argument, especially when I have to represent manufacturers. They want a consistent construction type. So when they're doing, certain materials, design, so forth, driving a podium in these like a 3 hour type 1 podium, and can imagine an extra urban kind of suburban environment, it's really more appropriate to the status quo of where we're trying to do mixed use retail. And to me, there'll be lots of applications in this where it only wants to be residential. And so driving a whole different material and construction type for those kind of buildings is kind of really, going to eliminate a lot of feasibility in some of these. So just ask everyone to be open to it, and thank you.
I heard a question asked, and I kind of have it myself, and I've not heard a complete explanation. So given 510.5, which is 510.9 on the screen here, and the single exit provisions that we have, John Hall stated that we could build a single exit 6-story type 3A building right now, as long as the floor area is 3,000 square feet or less. Is that a correct statement? And I'm asking anybody who thinks they have an opinion.
Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah, I was going to
Todd's,
say yes too. We've had something like this in Tacoma. So yeah, you actually
okay.
can.
So Todd's proposal has a limit of 6,000 square feet. And um, I'm curious if if that is 4,000 square feet, where do we draw that line, or why is there a line there between 3 and 6,000 feet? So, and
Roger,
go ahead.
I wanted to kind of address that specifically.
Sure.
Because Todd asked the question as well, can we talk about firewalls? And that's really what I think, Todd, you were trying to get to. Yeah,
Yeah, thank
510.5 is
you.
available, and it's about firewalls. And it requires a firewall to allow the smaller compartment to separate the compartments into 3,000. Dustin, instead of the Seattle language, could you please just put up the multiplex language, or pardon me, the single exit language? Thanks. If you can scroll up. So two things before I get into the compartments. I wanted to talk about the area limit comment. So right now, if you were to add that and didn't include an area limit, then the driving limitation would be the travel distance. So the 125 feet to an exit. And so I don't, yes, we're envisioning these smaller floor plates, but if you don't put an area limit, then you're going to get that 125-foot distance. Is that where we left it on this? I don't know where it is. It's a
I
little,
believe so.
and so that's 125. There it is. to the exit. So if you just took that as, a stair in the middle of a floor plate, 125-foot travel distance, that's from the farthest point of the unit, then you could be well beyond a, I think a 6,000 square foot floor plate with that allowable travel distance. So I do think an area limit, if you are going to evaluate this, is important. And then answering the question of how would you have a firewall and multiple compartments of 3,000 square feet? I think it's doable. Honestly, I haven't seen a single exit with 3,000 square foot compartments. We see that with a stair in each compartment. Actually, I just pulled up an example yesterday. I was trying to find out, like, how many variations of this have we seen? And we do allow the 5-10-10 internally in Seattle with the limitations again on 4 units per floor and the 2-hour first story. I think if you did have a firewall, you would end up having a 3,000, and it was bigger than a 3,000 square foot floor plate. You would have units on either side of the firewall and a stair in one of those compartments. And so from an egress situation, the exiting is still compliant for the floor. But the intent of the firewall is to be able to stay in that compartment. And that's how, and so you'll see in the Seattle provisions 4 or 5 that we have a stair in each compartment. So I think the question is, yes, you can build it with 5-10-5. Yes, without even adding any language that the code will allow it. And is it okay to have a compartment without exiting available to it? I personally don't, I have a heartache with that, but I think that the code allows it. And then the detailing on that would be potentially just, generally you would be able to do it with, the units are already 1 hour separation, just from dwelling unit separation. You'd find a firewall location that aligns with a unit wall, probably with a stair wall. Then you'd have a cross corridor door that continues basically the opening protection across the corridor. I don't know what you're asking about, Todd, when you say, can we talk more about firewalls? But that's how we've seen it.
Yeah, thank you, Adele. That is my question. I don't know if I fully understand how 2 compartments can share one stair. And I think that's what you're starting to get to or did. And I'm not sure if still understand. Is it 2 different exits to that stairwell to each compartment?
Do you want me to share plan set?
I would love it.
It would probably be good. We have a number of hands up, but if you can do that.
So Artel has to join in as a panelist, and then she should have permission to share the screen.
I do have to leave, so I'm just wanted to let everyone know.
Thank you, Shweta.
Thanks.
Thank you, Shweta.
And Chair, just a follow-up question while we're thinking
Yeah.
about that. What does that mean structurally when you have a firewall? And how does do the structural system, especially the seismic lateral system, work across a firewall? Thanks.
It's a good question. I think the answer, Todd, is you can do that. It is not an area separation wall, of which an area separation wall, you're supposed to basically allow a building on one side to be able to burn down and the other side stand up. It is a firewall. So
Yeah, Roger, you're right on that. Yeah, you could do it. the terminology is obviously confusing when you're in the non-structural provisions of the code and the structural. But yeah, Roger, you're correct on that. So
Okay.
Can you guys see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Sorry, I'm only going to share it briefly because I did not ask for permission to share, so I apologize to whoever plans that this is. But it would be a 3,000 square foot floor plate with a stair on one side and access still through the corridor on the other. But if I had an event on within, one of the 3,000 square foot compartments, I would not have access to it to egress from within the compartment. Say the fire was on this side would have access, but not vice versa. You'd still have access, but you'd be crossing into the compartment with the fire event.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. Jeremy?
Yes, thank you, Roger. Just a couple points. So area separation walls are UBC area separation walls. That's a term out of the UBC. Love it. Love it. Um, but firewalls were intended, I believe, to replace those because the definition of a firewall is that term that you quoted so perfectly, so as to allow the collapse of construction on either side. So that is, if we're talking firewalls and not fire barriers, then that is how they're constructed. The last sentence of a firewall definition: with sufficient structural stability under fire conditions to allow the collapse of construction on either side without the collapse of the wall. So it very much looks like an old school UVC area separation wall. That being said, I'll move to my other comment I had before the firewall and area separation wall comment, which was I think Todd brings up some good points with this. And after listening to everybody and seeing the IBC, not the Seattle code, but the IBC 510.5, where we can do this exact thing, except for it's limited to 3,000 square foot per floor, then I think Todd has a great case for a state amendment to that section of code in the IBC, for a Washington State Amendment to 510.5 to allow those larger areas. If we're going to allow them with a single exit, why wouldn't we allow them with the buildings with, more than one exit? So that's just my own opinion. I just don't know that it belongs in this single exit provision, but I think it might belong in a future Washington State Amendment. Thank you.
Okay, John Sue?
Yeah, so just going back to the firewall, yeah. Even though the definition does say that, we've modified it enough on structural independence and things like that to allow, in a wood frame building, for the things like the floor diaphragms to go through the walls. And so, do you really get that, behavior where you can actually collapse on one side and not on the other? I have my doubts about that. But that's you know that's what we've done in the code so far. The other thing is just address the floor plate size. If and Ardell kind of mentioned this, the 125 feet travel distance may not sound like a lot, but you are only measuring it on the floor to the stair. So if you do that, I did some work on this, back in last October or something like that. And I've got a sketch that basically shows you could have a floor plate pretty close to somewhere around in the range of 15,000 square feet and still be able to comply with the travel distance. So that's pretty big. And I know there's some things out there that talk about 4,000 square foot units, or as being a possibility. And so yes, that you're getting up to that level. So yes, you can have very large floor plates. And I agree with Ardell that it's very weird to have this firewall and one side doesn't have access to a stair. But there is some interpretation. You might be able to work your way around that, but as far as, you know, kind of the practical safety side of things, yes, you are forcing people to enter the fire, or potentially forcing people to enter the fire compartment.
Okay, Richard?
Yeah, so 510.10 does say that you have to have a stair in each compartment. It's 510.5 is silent on that, but I would just say these are firewalls we're talking about. So you're creating separate buildings on each side of that compartment. And I would say that follows that you would have to provide an exit out of each of those buildings. And so I know it doesn't say it specifically. I think maybe Seattle was trying to address that with their language to eliminate confusion, but I don't think that you get out of having to do that. My other thing would be by doing that, and maybe I'm going a little far on this, but I don't know why you couldn't have, each side of that firewall would have 20 units each served by a single exit, each one. Am I misreading that, or maybe John's going to tell me?
If John and Ardell, you're up next, but I have a question that is confusing me, and that is in 510.5, if your whole building, if your whole floor plate is 3,000 square feet or less, do you have to have it subdivided?
No.
Okay. Okay. So John, you were up next. Thank you for that, Ardell.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's a good answer. So Rich, just when we talk about the reason why we put that requirement in the code in that 51010 for a stair to be in each compartment is because that I was kind of glossing over it some earlier. That's where that interpretation comes. Does a firewall create a horizontal exit? And in the case in Seattle, our policy has been, and I presume it hasn't changed in 5 years, that if there are multiple firewalls in a building, not every compartment has to have one, has to have a stair. You can still have, if your floor only requires 2 exits, you can have 3 compartments, and the middle compartment doesn't necessarily have to have a stair. And there's all sorts of kind of interpretation reasoning that kind of goes with that. But that's the reason I just want to get back and say that's why we specifically said you had to have a stair in every compartment. So if you divide your building into three building compartments with 2 firewalls, every single one of those has to have a stair, as opposed to if it wasn't the 6-story case.
Okay. I'm being a little derelict of monitoring hands up. I guess Ardell put hers down. Todd, go ahead.
Yeah, and this is helping me a lot. And I just needed the education on the horizontal, so the firewalls. But I think this is kind of our constant criticism of the building codes is there's lots of things that are in here for very good reasons historically and so forth, but no one anticipated, my guess, I'll just say guess, in that section that we're talking about for 510.5, this consideration, right? So again, we're trying to put together a very specific prescriptive bundle for 6 stories, 4 per floor, which is where this started in the legislative. So I guess I would come back to say from a design standpoint, it just wouldn't be good design to design for that firewall. Let's actually design the building, the 4 per floor, and figure out what additional measures are necessary, given that we've already decided on a 13 system. We've already decided on pressurization. We've already decided on, all these different things. What would be the thing that gets us to not having that firewall and allowing just for this very specific, consideration so that we can drive down, the cost while maintaining all of the life safety. We have to, saying that differently is we're also tasked with just making this competitive. So how do we do that? And I don't think the firewall gets us there. I think we're kind of contorting ourselves to to get there within the existing other parts of the existing code. Not trying to take shortcuts here, just doesn't come across as good design yet.
Okay, Jeremy, go ahead, and then White.
I have a question for John. So I found the structural stability of firewalls where the floor sheathing can penetrate through the walls, but it's only for seismic area D and F. That doesn't work over where I live, but is there an exception? Is there a Washington Amendment I don't have? Because I'd love to be able to connect the dots and be able to use it in seismic C as well. Can you help me out with that? Is there a white paper or anything that I can go to?
No, sorry, we
Okay.
I'll leave it at that. Sorry, no, we kind of made that argument at the national level, and I think we argued it as being a seismic issue, and so I think the idea was to limit it to quote high seismic. Uh, uh, from a structural standpoint, I would prefer to have a continuous diaphragm in all the seismic zones, but that's not the way it works. So yeah.
As a structural engineer, I would prefer to have a diaphragm that goes across. That's way more important. And if you have one side burning, the plywood itself is not going to hold up the other side of the building, in my opinion. So I will go ahead. Hoyt, you're not.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize we're going to something where we're taking away more usable space to have, the single stair, the higher stories and stuff like that. And it seems like on our first try on this that the legislation is trying to make us, we should probably not debate so much, what we could do to where later on we could actually modify that later if we feel appropriate. Does that make sense? I mean, I don't think we're going to get this perfect on the first time, but I think you should lean on more of the life safety issues that we need to do. And it seems like we're getting away from that right now. We're starting to throw opinions in there. That's what I wanted to say. Because
Todd?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Hoyt, but I think we don't necessarily meet the intent then to come up with a very good design that meets all of those requirements. So, just to reiterate, a type 3 building, if we're in R2, I mean, the base area or the area is what, just going by memory, it's something like 48,000. Am I right on that? It's a big building. And then the Seattle provisions are saying, okay, above 6,000, you can do compartments of 12,000. Well, we're nowhere near 12,000. And I appreciate, John, if your calcs show that, you get to 14, yeah, we got to limit that then. There's no reason to not put that limitation in there. Hopefully it's based on something really logical, but, good design, even if it's 2s and 3 units, we're not talking about over 8,000. We could design really good buildings at 5,000-6,000 square feet. So I think that's completely reasonable if that's what in the right combination. I guess what other levers are there within the given improvements that are already there to allow the to allow the single stair? What are people worried about? Are they worried about that horizontal separation? It makes sense because if you're going to have the 5 stories at 20, that horizontal separation makes sense. I think 2 hours probably makes sense. I'd question why it has to be a 3-hour separation for that first story. But let's debate it. And then I think again, coming back to this common detailing, if those first units are residential, it's just making those really different. I really doubt they need to be retail at all times. So we want to try to get the common detailing in this design. So, okay, thank you.
Can I just add one more thing real quick?
Yes,
Just
go
one
ahead,
thing
Hoyt.
I want to think, we're starting to get these more units on there. One of the things that I've always been concerned about is, accessibility issues, area evacuation zones or people that don't have the access. I mean, all of us could I shouldn't say that. I mean, I have some back issues, so sometimes I can't move quite as fast as I used to going downstairs. And, that's another thing that we haven't really or I haven't seen that as much. How are we going to deal with people? I mean, people will buy these things, even though they may not have an elevator or something in there. They will do that. They will use these that may have temporary surgeries or temporary things, and but maybe that's not an issue. And I was wondering how Seattle does that if they still care about area evacuations in these type of structures. So.
Jeremy.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yeah, Todd had said, what are we worried about? I can't speak for the whole group, but ever since this take started, what I've been worried about personally is sacrificing life safety and lives on the altar of affordable housing or cheap housing. And what's that balance, right? We had a legislative mandate, and what's that whole balance? And we've put a lot of work into this as a group of trying to mitigate risks, analyze the risks. Thanks to Todd and his spreadsheet, he gave us a really good way to do that and evaluate it, and that was very helpful. It's been a long road, and I think we struck a pretty good balance. And I agree with Hoyt. This isn't going to be perfect the first time out, but this seems like a pretty good appendix that strikes a balance. It may get amended in near versions of the code in the near future, but I think it's a pretty good balance. That's my own personal opinion. Thank you.
Okay. Richard?
Yeah, responding to Hoyt's comments, Hoyt, if there's no elevator in the building, type A and type B units are limited to the first story. Anyway, if there is an elevator, because we have sprinklers, areas of refuge are no longer required. So,
Yeah,
maybe
that's
you were
true.
addressing
That's
something
true.
else,
Yeah.
but
No, that's right. That's right. Yeah. I was just thinking that as we were talking about it. Yeah, you're right about that. If there's no elevator, you don't have to have that. So, okay.
Ardell?
Thanks,
Yeah.
Rich, for answering White's question. But answering Todd's question, what is the risk? I mean, we allow this in our jurisdiction. So I'm going to say that this is unsafe because I do think it's safe. But is this the code change that should be exploring this, or should it be, or can we have a more robust discussion independent of single exit that says, what is a reasonable trade-off for an additional story of wood frame construction? I think that's just to do that within sort of this tag under the single exit provisions is maybe a little quick. And again, I think this is safe because we have it and we would allow it. Again, with the full 5, 10, 10 provisions that we have, a couple of them are missing from your proposal. And I would caution against adding it here and would welcome, direction to do it as a 2027 code change for all type 3A construction.
Okay. Richard, and then we'll go to Russell.
yeah, I agree with what Ardell just said. What I'm concerned about is having this getting buried in an appendix. And I really would be in favor of some revision to 510.5 that makes those allowances a little more usable. But I think that needs to be presented to a building code tag and have it be discussed there so it can be picked up by and used by everybody in the code, not just for single exit. It just in terms of kind of functionality of the building code, I really think it needs to be done in that way. So thanks.
Okay. I think Russell was next. Russell, your hand's up. And there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to mention that even though there's no area of refuge requirement, because there's an elevator, you're still required to have a two-way call station at every elevator landing above the first floor for rescue assistance. So it's addressed by other parts of the code.
Okay. If there's an elevator, then you have that. Yeah. Okay. Todd?
I think these are really good points, and maybe that is the question of addressing 510.5, and maybe asking the question of on that why 3 hours on that first floor, and then why 3,000 square feet? Because that would also be a way to just address it is to say, why not 5,000 feet? Why not 6,000 feet? Or give an exception, you know, in that section for if we're designing to this appendix. Can anyone help understand where 3,000 square feet comes from? That'd be kind of the key one right there. It's too small for what we're designing here, but we're not asking for 48,000 or 12,000 even for the compartment.
Ardell, do you have an answer?
I don't have an answer, Todd, but 3,000 is not that small anymore. I think that we can do, I know that we can see, we've seen 4 units that are pretty close to 3,000 square foot floor plate. Because right now, like with the zoning changes, uh, at the state and now being carried out in local jurisdictions, you can take any essentially any lot and put 4 units in. I mean, there's a lot of density coming online for us, and 3,000 square foot is doable now for four units on a floor.
No,
Yeah, we're having the same thing in Tacoma. So I just want to say we're getting those same type of structures. So
no, if I may, Chair, I agree, but I guess I don't know where the number comes from. You think we could just talk for a couple minutes on where 3,000 comes from? How is that defensible, or is that just historic number that?
Historic. We'd have to dig into ICC because it's model code.
Yeah.
Maybe John, do you know?
No, I was just going to say the same thing. It'd take a research project to go back. Which of the three codes did it come from? If it was, was it in UBC? Was it in, National Building Code? Was it in Southern? Who got it? And then figure out, do they have the records to say why, how they established that number? It's a research project.
I see Micah's hand up. Does Micah have an answer to that question?
I have a very short history, so not exactly in the 3,000, but in the 2012 code 504.2 had an automatic sprinkler system increase. They got modified in the 2015 code, and then there was a gap in this section in the 2018 code that got modified actually by Lee Krantz from Bellevue. And that's how we ended up with this language. Not particular to 3,000, but I assume that 3,000 came from the table back when 504.2 in the 2012 pointed to it, at least close. There's a short history. We could go further back and actually find that exact number at some point, but that's the starting point for everyone. Thanks.
Okay, Jeremy?
Yes, sir. Just wanted to say that I'm running up against my conflict and I have to bow out here. Do you still have a quorum when I go?
And Jeremy, with you heading out, we will be suffering lack of quorum.
Okay. I've got about 3-4 minutes here before I've got a conflict and I have to run down City Hall and get to another meeting.
Ken, go ahead, given our time crunch here with taking any official action.
Well, my recommendation, and I'm representing Seattle Fire Marshal on this, is that the item number 21 be removed. We think that the tag did great work on putting this together. Yes, it needs more discussion. Yes, 510.5 already gives you provisions for type 3A construction. And I do think that there could be, something that we could discuss in the future at the tag, either building code tag or another tag, with regards to having a 510.10 similar to Seattle that they have now. But our recommendation is that the tag did great work, but this 21 needs some more debate. So we're encouraging the tag not to go forward with this number 21. Thanks.
Okay, David?
If you would, I support Ken, and I'm really appreciate the conversation from Ardell. But if you're looking for a motion, I would move that number 21 be removed from this document for the reasons stated by Ken Brulette.
Okay.
I just want to say I also agree with Ken. I just wanted to point that out real quick, even though I'm not on the committee. This is Hoyt.
Okay, David, can I just be clear that 21 is not added to the document that we passed previously?
Then I would amend my motion to mean not added
Okay.
to the document previously.
Do I have a second?
Second. It's John.
Thanks, John. Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor of not adding number 21, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. I think it is a really, really good conversation. I think it's something we need to continue to look at, whether it is added to this appendix in the next code cycle or, as people have said, a broader change to the full IBC. So, okay, that gets us to other business. Does anybody have any other business?
Not for me.
Okay, thank you all for the discussion and conversation, and we will adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you, Roger. Thanks, Dustin. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Todd.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks.
Thank you.